Hey, peace. What's happening, everyone? On our deal with.
Like the rushing of a mighty wind. Like the rushing of a mighty wind.
Hey, what's happening, everyone? Today, I really want to talk about. I want to talk about Jesse Jackson and his African American movement, or his movement to replace the words Negro and Black with African American. Try and get an understanding of what his motivations were, what he was trying to accomplish, what was going on at the time. And all of this is kind of to try and help us understand more what's going on today with FBA and their movement to move away from African American. My thinking is that FBA is a delineation movement, and they are pretty much trying to delineate from Africans, or from anyone who considers themselves to be Africans, including Caribbeans. They're trying to delineate from being African, which is why it's important to them to not be referred to as African American. They'd rather Black American, foundational Black American, but they want to delineate from Africa, is really my best understanding of what their movement is about. But surely it's a delineation movement. And so I kind of want to do a little quick research on Jesse Jackson and his movement to use the word African American, and just kind of see what we can draw from it. So I'm going to do the regular ChatGPT thing. And the first question I asked ChatGPT is, why did Jesse Jackson create the term African American? What was happening at the time? And how did he want the term used? And who did he want it to refer to? I think that's a pretty in-depth question of kind of everything I wanted to get into. So I kind of put it all together. ChatGPT says, great question. The shift to the term African American is a fascinating mix of politics, identity making, census categories, international diplomacy, and domestic coalition building in the 1980s. So a lot of factors at play here. And it says, here's a clear breakdown. Number one, why Jesse Jackson promoted the term, 1988 to 1989. Although the term already existed academically and in Black intellectual circles, with Du Bois and others using it earlier, Jesse Jackson popularized and nationalized it in 1988 to 1989 through press conferences and media framing. Jackson's stated reasons included A, national identity and ethnonym. And there's that word, ethnonym, that a lot of people like to throw around. Like, this is an ethnonym. So Jesse's intention for African American was exactly the same intention that FBA have for foundational Black American, to use it as an ethnonym. He argued Black Americans lacked a recognized ethnic national identity comparable to Irish American, Italian American, Jewish American, Mexican American. His line was essentially, quote, every ethnic group in America has a hyphenated identity except us. This connected to the idea that Black Americans are not just a race category, but a distinct people with a national history and shared descent rooted in the US and Africa. So all of that, if you take out the Africa part, that's fundamentally what FBA is about. And I'll read it again with taking out the Africa part. He says, Black Americans are not just a category, but a distinct people with a national history and shared descent rooted in the US. That's FBA. The only thing different is that Jesse said they are rooted in the US and Africa. But fundamentally, The idea is the same, is to create an ethnonym or to delineate or to draw a line or a distinction between Africans in America and who have roots in America through slavery and Africans from everywhere else. That was Jesse's intent. And again, the main difference is that Jesse acknowledged their African ancestry, where FDA isn't, totally on board with African descent. I think they think that's questionable. So the first reason again was national identity and ethnonym. B, heritage plus citizenship framing. African American framed Black identity as diasporic heritage from Africa and civic nationality, or American. So there's the diasporic heritage from Africa, which FBA is questionable about, and then civic nationality. And FBA, this is another major distinction. FBA is not into civic nationality. FBA is into ethnic nationality. And I've spoken about that, in a couple of videos before. But FBA is about ethnic nationality. FBA do not want immigrants to even be considered American. They want them to have a totally different name, and that FBA is the only Americans, according to some of them, that is. This was designed to counter labels like Negro, colored, and Black, which were either racial, imposed, or disconnected from ancestry. So, again, he was absolutely trying to delineate or make a distinction between American Blacks and Blacks elsewhere. C, underogatory and dignifying. Jackson repeatedly made the point that names shape dignity and social value, similar to how Jew to Jewish or Negro to Black movements sought agency. So these terms were underogatory as opposed to terms like Negro or Black or colored. Like, these terms he felt were derogatory, I guess, because they were imposed on them by the slave master. All of these terms, Negro, Black, colored, are terms that were imposed, and he felt they were derogatory. They were, I guess, kind of, based on our status as slaves and people looking down on us as slaves. So they were derogatory terms, which is why he wanted to get away from them. So it was about being underogatory and dignifying. He thought that African American was more dignified because it had social value. Number 2, what was happening politically at the time? The timing was not accidental. Key contexts. 1, post-civil rights institutional phase. 1980s was the period where Black citizenship claims moved from mass protest to institutions, law, culture, and diplomacy. 2, the 1988 presidential election. Jackson had just run for president and placed a strong second in primaries, becoming a global political figure. The name shift helped his strategy of international diplomacy, which is Africa plus Third World, multicultural domestic coalitions, and recognition as a constituency in the Democratic Party. So he wanted international diplomacy. The reasons he wanted to use the word African American was for international diplomacy, a connection with Africa and the Third World, multicultural domestic coalitions, creating coalitions within America that was multicultural by creating a strong base, if you will, and recognition as a constituency in the Democratic Party. It was political. They wanted a multicultural coalition that can be seen as a constituency within the Democratic Party. So those were his main objectives. Number 3, multiculturalism and ethnic revival era. The late 70s and 80s saw the rise of ethnic studies departments, Afrocentric education, immigration reform in the 1965 Act effects, identity politics as a category, and US Census experimenting with categories. So, multiculturalism was the thing. It was the in thing. It was, if you are not multicultural, you're not in the in crowd. Ethnic studies programs, Afrocentric education, immigration reform, identity politics. That's really what was going on at that time. And that was a part of the reason why he chose the term African American. Number 4, US and Africa politics, Cold War Africa, anti-apartheid movements, and the ANC fight against South Africa increased diaspora consciousness. The term African American had diplomatic utility. It tied US descendants of slaves to African liberation struggles. 5, census, demographers, and government language. There were simultaneous bureaucratic debates about replacing Negro or Black in census forms, education, labor demographics, medical research, affirmative action policy. Jackson's intervention gave these bureaucratic debates a usable, proper, or popular term. 3, who he intended the term to refer to. This part is crucial and often misunderstood today. Jackson's framing at the time strongly implied US-born Black descendants of enslaved people, not necessarily all Africans or immigrants with Black ancestry. So again, Jesse's objective was delineation. He meant the term African American only to apply to US-born Black descendants of enslaved people, or ADOS FBA. That was his intention. So the same thing that FBA is trying to do is the same thing that Jesse wanted to do. The FBA and ADOS position is using the term African American dilutes that purpose, because African American can be applied to immigrants that come here because they are of African descent, and so they can and have been using that term, which is why they mainly want to get away from it. They don't just want to, make sure that on the census or stuff like that, only FBA check African American. They want that term gone entirely. They don't want that term to be used. So from Jesse's viewpoint, this was done, or rather, it did not necessarily, not all Africans and immigrants were included. Why? Because his rhetoric emphasized African lineage, American historical experience, slavery plus Reconstruction, civil rights struggle, a people forged in America. That aligns more closely with what groups today like Freedmen, FBA, or ADOS, though those terms did not exist yet publicly. So what he was doing strongly aligns with what FBA does or trying to do today. FBA has brought up the fight again because they believe that the term African American has diluted Jesse's intentions and it is now misused. And that everyone is picking African American and everyone is being seen as an African American. So they believe that Jesse's purpose has been lost and they want to find it or reestablish it. But, says ChatGPT, there's a wrinkle. Jackson himself also referenced global diaspora solidarity and often included Caribbean-descended Black Americans under the umbrella when talking about the U.S. Black population. He did not, however, explicitly design the term to cover African immigrants who were small in number pre-1990, Afro-Caribbean immigrants as a separate ethnic category, continental Africans who remain African nationals, and Black Latinos as a distinct group. Those distinctions only became salient after the immigration boom of the 1990s and 2000s. So Jesse did not intend African American to be used for anyone other than Black Americans who are descendants of slaves. But it does say Jackson himself referenced global diaspora solidarity. In his speeches, he would talk about, Black Americans, Caribbean Blacks, like he would reference us all as one diaspora. And he included Caribbean descended Black Americans under the umbrella of African Americans. So this is also, a part of his doing as well. The fact that African American became this pan-racial term that he didn't want it to be. He takes responsibility for part of that because of his political aspirations, because he wanted to create this constituency of Black people to help him with his run for president. So all of this is his responsibility as well. And not just his responsibility, but the Black community at that time, because I'm sure they were aware of this, that this was all about constituency building. And I don't think they objected to it at the time, because at the time it was very important to build that constituency. How Jackson wanted the term used. Intended uses as a formal ethnonym, as a governmental or census or institutional category, as a source of ethnic pride, and as a political constituency name. It was not intended as a broad racial umbrella term for all Black people globally. It was not a synonym for Black as a mere phenotype category. The purpose was nation building and citizenship recognition, not just race labeling. So this was not meant to be a racial term as far as Jesse saw it. It was an ethnonym, it was an ethnic term referring only to what we would call today FBA or ADOS. It's interesting because they're using it on the census form in the exact way that Jesse did not want it to be used, as a synonym for Black, as a mere phenotype category. That's how it's used on the census and on OMB forms and other government forms. It's a synonym for Black. They have Black/African American, and that's a category you pick. And I'm wondering if it was put on those forms for the same constituency building purposes, as a way to bring them under the umbrella. Because that would be really interesting that, on government forms, it's being done exactly the way Jesse did not want it to be done. What was the motivation on the part of the government for doing so? But we'll probably get to that later. Number 5, why it succeeded and why it changed meaning later. It succeeded because schools adopted it, media adopted it, Census eventually adopted related framing, human resources departments and universities adopted it. But immigration changed the field. After 1990, large increases in Nigerian, Ghanaian, Ethiopian, Somali immigration, Afro-Caribbean immigration, Afro-Latin immigration shifted the meaning from ethno-national to pan-racial, creating the later debates between FBA, ADOS, and Freedmen versus pan-Black or diaspora frameworks. So So in the 1990s and 2000s, when more immigrants started coming in, when more black immigrants started coming in, I guess they started to fall under the racial category of African American, and that diluted the distinction. And that's where the problem started. And when we think about it, FBA say they are the ones responsible for bringing those immigrants here. They're the ones responsible for changing policy for the 1965 Immigration Act and all other immigration policies that follow. They claim responsibility for all of them, for all of this. So if the dilution in African American, if that dilution did take place and did create issues for them, then they'll have to take responsibility for it. Because according to them, they're the ones that made it possible for these immigrants to come here. I guess they didn't foresee these problems. They didn't foresee these problems. Those problems were not, problems for them then. The issue of delineation was not a big problem because there was not a lot of Africans and Caribbean immigrants here. So it wasn't a major issue. Most of the people that were checking African Americans were literally ADOS and FBA type people with that were descendants of slaves here. But once the floodgates of immigration was open to black Americans in the 90s and in the 2000s, that's when the issue occurred, because on census forms, they all started checking African American as a racial term. And so they all started to be classed as African Americans. So again, if FBA is going to take responsibility for this, for opening the gates for immigration for black immigrants, then they have to take responsibility for the dilution of the term African American, and for them not being able to see that this was going to be an issue. And maybe they didn't see it as an issue back then. Back then, their main issue was building the constituency. Maybe they opened up the floodgates in order to build their democratic constituency. All of that is a part of the full story. And all of that goes to show that the issue of the phrase African American becoming diluted and becoming a pan-racial term falls at the feet of no one else but the African American. It is the African American who wanted to build the democratic constituency. They're the ones that opened the floodgates and I believe made it possible and encouraged people to sign up as black and African American in order to build that political constituency. I think all of that was in play. And so they have to take responsibility for that. Or if not full responsibility, a large part of the responsibility lies at their feet. So the summary answer. Why did Jackson promote it? To give black descendants of African slavery a proper ethnic national name with dignity, heritage, and political power. What was happening at the time? Late Cold War, post-civil rights, anti-apartheid, multiculturalism, census or immigration reforms, and Jackson's 1988 presidential run. How did he want it used? As a formal ethnonym, comparable to Irish American or Italian American, not just a skin color term. Who did it originally refer to? Primarily black Americans rooted in slavery plus Jim Crow plus civil rights lineage, not all black people or immigrants. And so with that said, the next question I asked was, would FBA be okay with keeping the term African American, but making it only applicable on the census to the people Jackson intended it for? ChatGPT says that's a really sharp framing, and it gets to the heart of a fight that's been simmering for about 15 to 20 years around category drift. Who a term originally meant versus who later gets counted under it. The short answer first. Yes, a large amount of FBA or ADOS freedmen thinkers would be okay with keeping African American if it returned to Jackson's original lineage-based meaning. But it would depend on the clarity of the lineage definition, how the census operationalizes it, and whether access to benefits or resources is tied to it. And I think that last piece is important, the benefits and resources, because that ultimately is the main goal of delineation. The main goal of delineation is drawing a line between American blacks and other blacks. They want to draw a line for benefits and resources. That's the main delineation I think that is trying to be made. And it says now the deeper context. 1. Why FBA or ADOS people object today. The objection today isn't the term itself, it's the broad racialization of it. Over the last 30 years, African American shifted from ethno-national identity in 1988 to pan-black racial umbrella in the 2000s to 2020s. So it now includes Haitian Americans, Jamaican Americans, Ghanaian Americans, Nigerian Americans, Afro-Latino Americans, continental Africans residing in the US, sometimes even non-American diaspora. And FBA argue that this dilutes lineage. It erases distinct historical claims, especially reparations, and shifts representation in politics, scholarships, DEI sectors, and cultural narratives. Number 2, why they would likely accept the term if restored. Jackson's original intent maps much closer to what FBA or ADOS call the freedmen lineage or U.S. descendants of slavery. When people within FBA talk about returning African American to its original meaning, they point to slavery lineage, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, the Great Migration, the Civil Rights Movement, and U.S. civic nationhood. That's effectively the FBA case. So yes, in principle, keep the term, but fix the delineation or fix the definition. Keep the term, fix the definition. And, personally, I think that there is a growing number of FBA people that don't want to just fix the definition. They want to get rid of the term itself because the term includes the word African in it, and they don't see themselves as African. That's why they say they have native lineage. They were always here in America. Some of them claim to be Indians, that they are not African. So I would add to this and say, certainly as there are FBA people that are okay with keeping the term and changing the definition, there are also those that are totally against the term because they don't see themselves as African. Number 3, the census angle, why it matters. The census isn't just symbolic. It determines federal funding, congressional districts, education stats, affirmative action categories, civil rights litigation categories, public health data, median income reporting, immigration, and ancestry tracking. Right now, Black or African American lumps together very different populations. Example, Nigerian American median income versus FBA median income. Immigrant educational attainment versus FBA historical deprivation. Reparations eligibility versus immigrant arrival after 1980. FBA argue that this skews data, which then justifies bad policy. So FBA's position is that being lumped with all of these other people is not a good look for them. It skews their data, and as a result, there's bad policy which affects them in negative ways. Number 4, what FBA would want the census category to do. Most FBA thinkers emphasize lineage distinction, not exclusion of others. The likely preferred structure would be A. African American or freedman lineage for descendants of U.S. slavery. B. African immigrant American for Nigerians, Ghanaians, Ethiopians, etc. C. Afro-Caribbean American for Jamaicans, Haitians, Trinidadians, etc. And D. Afro-Latino American for Dominican, Cuban, Black, Brazilians, etc. This mirrors how census handles Chinese versus Japanese versus Vietnamese, Mexican versus Puerto Rican versus Cuban, Irish versus Italian versus Polish, historically. Would FBA prefer a different term instead? Some would. Within that world, there's split sentiment. A. Keep African American, but restrict by lineage. B. Replace it with freedmen, or FBA, or ADOS, or Black American, or Foundational Black American, or American Freedmen. C. Dual identity framework, where African American refers to the diaspora heritage, and freedmen refers to the legal historical lineage. Number 6, the political reality check. The reason a lot of FBA thinkers would favor the proposal of keeping the term African American but restricting it by lineage, keeping the term but only Black Americans of slavery descent can use it. The reason a lot of FBA thinkers would want to keep that is because it honors the original intention, which is Jesse Jackson's 1988 intention. It maintains continuity, not confusing the public. It improves census precision. It supports reparations eligibility. It prevents immigrant substitution effects in DEI and representation. And it clarifies statistical disparities that are masked today. Number 7, the only major objection. The only pushback some FBA might have is symbolic, not technical. The term African American still centers Africa, not the U.S. nationhood they built. Meaning some prefer, we are American first. Africa is ancestry, not nationality. That's where terms like freedman and Black American have gained steam. And I do agree with that. I think that may be the major objection. But I also think there are some people that just don't consider themselves African and don't want to have the word African apply to them in any way. Number 8, so the direct answer to the question, would FBA be okay with the term if restored to Jackson's intent on the census? For most, yes, especially if paired with reparations lineage criteria and statistical clarity. For a minority, they'd argue the term still doesn't express sovereign American cultural identity, so they'd prefer replacing it. Now, the next question I asked, I think kind of really gets to the heart of the matter, for me anyway, and just certain things that I think are really important to understand. And the question is there any reason why the OMB, the Office of Management and Budgeting, would object to the likely preferred structure of FBA? Like, why would they object to what FBA wants in terms of the delineations within the census forms? And it says, yes, there are several very specific reasons the Office of Management and Budget, Census Bureau, and related federal statistical agencies might object to the FBA preferred structure. None of these reasons are moral judgments. They are bureaucratic, political, and diplomatic constraints that shape how federal categories get made. Let's break it down cleanly. Number one, OMB prefers high-level, broad racial categories. OMB's statistical philosophy since 1977, updated in 1997, under review in 2023 to 2025, has been race equals broad, ethnicity equals subdivisions. Example for Asians: the race is Asian, the ethnicity is Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Vietnamese, etc. FBA structure demands the reverse for Black Americans. They want the subdivision by lineage within the same race. That's something OMB has never done domestically for a racial group. And I wasn't exactly sure why, the preferred FBA structure was reversing the broad racial category when they were all still within the same race. So I asked ChatGPT that question. I said, how does subdivision by lineage within the same race reverse broad racial categories if it's within the same race? And it said, great question, and that's the right pressure point. On its face, subdivision within the same race sounds like it shouldn't threaten broad racial categories at all. After all, Asians already have this structure. The race is Asian and the subgroups are Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Korean, etc. So why would breaking out Black into freedmen versus Caribbean versus African immigrant be treated as reversing or undermining the broad category? The answer is that in the US context, broad racial categories are not merely descriptive. They are legal, political, and remedial categories, and that's the core distinction. Let's unpack it cleanly. Number one, in OMB logic, race equals legal remedial class. Broad racial categories exist because of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, FHA or HUD regulations, EEOC enforcement, DOJ litigation, affirmative action, and discrimination jurisprudence. In the US, race was standardized for anti-discrimination enforcement, not for cultural accuracy. And I'll read that statement again. In the US, race was standardized for anti-discrimination enforcement, not for cultural accuracy. So when OMB says Black or African American, they are defining a protected class for rights enforcement. That's why fragmentation matters. 2. Lineage subdivision creates different remedial histories. Subdividing whites into Irish, Italian, Polish doesn't create different entitlement histories, but subdividing Blacks does, because freedman lineage equals slavery plus Jim Crow plus redlining plus GI Bill exclusion plus civil rights repression. Caribbean or immigrant lineage equals post-1965 arrivals with no U.S. slavery deprivation. Now, two different remedial histories exist within one race. The legal system is not designed to handle that. 3. Subdivision reveals that Black was a proxy label. Once lineage gets recognized, something becomes obvious. Black was always a proxy label for freedman lineage. not race alone. Before immigration, race and lineage were almost identical categories. Subdivision breaks the illusion that black equals one people with one history. Number 4 is the idea that subdivision forces institutions to choose who gets what. Under current pan-black category, discrimination protections, DEI benefits, college admissions advantages, minority contracting, political representation apply to everyone inside the category. Lineage subdivision asks, who does each thing actually belong to? This is much more disruptive than ethnic subcategories for Asians. It makes the broad category no longer function as a single claim. Black as a political identity works because it bundles united claim, united grievance, united historical oppression, united narrative. Subdivision produces different grievances, different trajectories, different claims, different entitlements. This is what I meant when I said it reverses the broad category, not by erasing it, but by breaking its political coherence. Number 6, the Asian case is not parallel. This is key. Why Asians can be subdivided without political crisis. Chinese versus Filipino versus Japanese have similar immigration-based histories. No unified U.S. historical deprivation narrative. Anti-Asian discrimination is not tied to multi-century slavery system. No reparations movements based on ancestry. No Voting Rights Act monitoring where nationality affects outcomes. Asian Americans are not historically treated as an internal quote-unquote caste. Subdivision doesn't threaten Asian racial politics because Asian politics has no lineage-based remedial claim. Number 7, subdivision threatens the machinery of Black unity politics. Pan-Black unity has been foundational for democratic coalition strategy, for civil rights organizations, for Black church networks, for media representation, for cultural production, for Black leadership legitimacy. Lineage splits reveal different interests, different economic profiles, different immigrant versus native dynamics, different elite versus grassroots positioning. That's destabilizing. And let's remember who it says these subdivisions destabilize. It says it destabilizes the Democratic Coalition, civil rights organizations, the Black church networks, media representation, cultural production, and Black leadership legitimacy. So if all of these are destabilized, that means all of these constituents, if you will, all of these different parts of the Black American community benefited from all Blacks being under that umbrella. And not only did they benefit from it, or rather, since they benefited from it, it's likely that they pushed for it. And so all of us being under one umbrella was something that was pushed for within the Black American community for its own survival. Number 8, subdivision clarifies reparations eligibility. This is the nuclear core. With subdivision, freedmen equals eligible. African or Caribbean immigrants equal not eligible. Without subdivision, eligibility remains ambiguous. The state prefers ambiguity until forced otherwise. So the final answer, how does subdivision within the same race reverse broad racial categories? Because broad racial categories in the US are not ethnographic. They are remedial coalitions. Lineage subdivision transforms race from a protected class into a set of distinct entitlement classes. Once you do that, the underlying reason for the broad racial box collapses. So I guess now that we have a better understanding of how subdivision by lineage reverses the broad racial categories that, the OMB and the Census Bureau and other groups prefer. Now that we have a better understanding of that, let's go back to, why they object to the preferred structure of FBA, of subdivision by lineage. The first reason we discussed was that, again, the OMB prefers high-level, broad racial categories. And we got up to the second reason. It says that subdivision by lineage would break the current pan-Black statistical model. Right now, OMB treats all Black descended peoples as one category for civil rights enforcement, anti-discrimination law, Voting Rights Act data, and DOJ litigation, and school segregation monitoring. If broken into freedman lineage, Afro-Caribbean, African immigrant, Afro-Latino, then DOJ would have to track disparities separately. Housing discrimination, school discipline, policing patterns, voting access. And this would change how racial inequality gets measured in the US. That's a big policy shift. It would change how racial inequality gets measured. And, that's important. And I think, that's the stuff it was talking about with trying to use proxies. But let's continue. Number 3, reparations shadow. The moment you distinguish lineage, you implicitly distinguish who suffered historical deprivation versus who immigrated later. OMB normally avoids constructing categories that could become legal claimant classes, especially involving slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, and racial wealth transfers. Government lawyers and the White House counsel's office worry about precedent. Number 4, diplomatic complications. Breaking out Black populations by national origin affects Caribbean states, Haiti and Jamaica, etc. It affects African states, Nigeria, Ghana, Ethiopia, etc. CARICOM Reparations Commission, the AU 6th Region Diaspora Agenda, and the US-Africa Summit or trade agreements. State Department hates categories that create diaspora rifts that foreign ministries can see on paper. Number 5, DEI and higher education stakeholders would object. Right now, Black or African American is a single admissions or DEI category. Breakout exposes disparities in Ivy League admissions, Nigerian plus Caribbean overrepresentation versus FBA underrepresentation, STEM fellowships, corporate DEI hiring, federal internships. Universities and corporations benefit from the pan-Black umbrella and would lobby OMB not to disaggregate. Immigration interests would object quietly. Separating freedman lineage from African or Caribbean immigrants changes how power operates in urban politics, Black leadership roles, congressional representation, and elite professions. Cities like New York City, DC, Atlanta, Miami, and LA would have political factions split. OMB hates domestic political splits caused by category design. And these are like really important reasons for why they're against the subdivisions. And I think that, each one is actually worth addressing on its own, because I don't want this video to go too long. But I will be, talking more about each of these objections and each of these groups or facets within American government that would object, and their reasons for objecting, and just exactly what it means and whether or not these objections would rule the day or would win the debate, and whether OMB would be more likely to side with. Number 7, inertia plus path dependence. Federal statistical systems have tens of thousands of downstream data dependencies. NIH medical research, CDC health surveillance, labor statistics, education statistics, incarceration reporting, economic mobility data. Changing categories isn't just symbolic. It breaks data sets going back 50 plus years unless they invest in conversion models and continuity tables. OMB will resist anything that is expensive, disruptive, legally combustible. FBA structure is all three. Wow. So I guess, that's what the OMB has to juggle. Those are the two things it has to weigh to see which side it goes on. Do they switch from what they're doing to something more expensive, more disruptive, and more legally combustible for the sake of FBA subdivision? I doubt they'll be willing to go through that. I just don't think that's what they're willing to do. And then it says, number 8, but here's the twist. OMB already knows the problem. Even OMB staff plus census demographers have admitted in internal reports that pan-Black category hides inequality between immigrant Blacks and U.S. freedmen lineage. So privately they admit what FBA argues publicly. But bureaucracies often acknowledge problems they won't fix for political reasons. So they'll acknowledge the problem, but there's too much involved in fixing that problem. It's like they do a cost-benefit analysis. The benefits of fixing the problem is not worth the cost of it. The benefits of fixing it is not worth the cost. And number 9, the most sensitive reason. If OMB disaggregates, it would validate the FBA ADOS premise. Black Americans are not just a race, but a distinct ethno-national group formed through slavery and Reconstruction. Validation by census equals validation by government, which equals validation of reparations lineage. And that's the nuclear policy implication. So the final answer to the question, would OMB object? Yes, not because it's inaccurate, but because it has cascading consequences across 1, federal statistical architecture, 2, immigration politics, 3, university or DEI systems, 4, diplomatic strategy, 5, domestic ethnic coalitions, 6, reparations law, and 7, civil rights enforcement. And then it gives what ChatGPT calls a bonus insight, which it says is important. It says, ironically, if FBA had the exact same argument, but were Jewish, Armenian, Indigenous, Italian, or Irish, OMB would have already created the distinction. It's not about logic. It's about the political cost of acknowledging the lineage claim publicly. I then asked, but doesn't the OMB allow people in the Black or African American category to write in their origins? Why doesn't this cause the problems they're trying to avoid? And it says, excellent follow-up, and you're right to spot the distinction. Yes, OMB or Census already lets people who select Black or African American to write in a specific origin. Example, Jamaican, Haitian, Nigerian, Ghanaian, Somali, African American, Black, Creole, Afro-Latino, etc. But this does not trigger the political consequences of a formal FBA-style disaggregation. And the reasons why get very interesting. Writings are voluntary, not structural. Writings are self-selected identity signals. They do not create official statistical subgroups. The government can ignore or collapse them back into the umbrella category. This is the difference between data collected versus categories recognized. FBA wants the second one. OMB currently only tolerates the first. 2. Writings are not used for rights, allocations, or enforcement. Even when Census publishes tables about Jamaican origin or Nigerian origin, those data are rarely used for civil rights lawsuits, resource distribution, school funding, ESG or DEI reporting, admissions and hiring quotas, health or wealth disparities, reparations frameworks. So write-ins remain sociological trivia, not legal categories. The minute you attach government consequences to lineage distinctions, the calculus changes. Number 3, writings don't create lineage classes. Current writings are national origin identifiers, not historical deprivation lineages. OMB's nightmare scenario isn't Jamaican versus Nigerian. It's descendants of slavery versus arrivals after 1965. One is just ethnicity. The other is genealogical entitlement. Number 4, write-ins don't force disaggregation. OMB can and often does lump writings right back into Black or African American. FBA's preferred model would require the system to actually separate the populations. Example, Black with freedman lineage, Black of Caribbean descent, and Black of African immigrant descent. That affects policy design, reparations claims, economic metrics, education, wealth data, labor reports, civil rights enforcement. And write-ins don't force any of that. So 5, write-ins are politically harmless. A Jamaican immigrant write-in Jamaican doesn't create a conflict with DOJ, the State Department, CARICOM, African Union, domestic civil rights groups, universities, or DEI systems. But a recognized freedman lineage category would alter representation, claims making, eligibility, redistributive policy, historical accountability. That is qualitatively different. Write-ins don't threaten reparations logic. The biggest unspoken issue: if African or Caribbean Black immigrants can write Jamaican or Nigerian, nobody worries. But if Census separated lineage like this, African American freedmen versus Black foreign origin, then immediately someone can ask which group is owed compensation for slavery or Jim Crow and which isn't. Government avoids categories that make that question legally actionable. Number 7, write-ins don't fragment the domestic Black political bloc. Pan-Black unity at the ballot box is a major feature of U.S. politics. Disaggregated categories might reveal different interests, different political behavior, different socioeconomic trajectories. State-level Democrats worry about fracturing Black voting blocs. OMB is not political, but it is not politics blind either. Number 8, statistical agencies can pretend the write-ins don't exist. What Census does now, it collects them, publishes some reports, but rarely uses them to build official categories. It's like allowing people to express identity while the government keeps its statistical architecture intact. So to answer the question directly, why don't write-ins cause the problems OMB is trying to avoid? Because writings are voluntary, symbolic, ignorable, non-binding, non-operational, non-legal, non-allocative, non-lineage-based, non-reparative, and non-diplomatic. Whereas the FBA ask is mandatory, structural, lineage-based, has legal claim implications, redistributes resources, challenges DEI, splits foreign versus native Black identities, affects civil rights law, and dovetails with reparations politics. So the final insight, or the key takeaway: OMB is okay with identity data. OMB is not okay with lineage categories that define entitlement or deprivation. That's the line. And the final question I want to ask, for this question anyway, because, this reading has brought up so many other questions for me. And again, those questions I plan on addressing on future videos. But for this one, the last question I asked is, did Jackson ever present how he thought the OMB should set up categories? And it says, good question, and it makes sense to ask because Jackson was thinking in policy, not just culture. The short answer, no. Jackson never formally presented a technical category structure to the OMB or Census in the way FBA or ADOS thinkers do today. But he did articulate publicly and privately what the conceptual category should represent, and that has consequences for how the category could have been structured. Let's go deeper and make the distinctions clear. What Jackson actually did. Jackson's intervention in 88 and 89 consisted of a press conference announcing the term, lobbying major newspapers and media, speaking to Black civil rights organizations, getting buy-in from the Democratic political class, and pushing adoption inside schools and universities, or schools and institutions. His emphasis was on norm formation, not bureaucratic category design. He didn't submit no formal OMB referendum, no census rule-making proposal, no statistical definitions, no subcategories, no lineage criteria. Why he didn't do the technical part? For two reasons. A, the political target was cultural legitimacy. Jackson was trying to redefine how America named the group, identity first, policy second. B, the timing. In 1988 to 89, the immigrant Black population was tiny. So issues like Nigerian or Caribbean distinction, African immigrant versus freedman, Afro-Latino classification were not politically salient yet. Jackson could assume Black equals descendants of U.S. slavery because in 1989, that was approximately 95 to 97% true. 3. What he did imply about category content. While not technical, his speeches clearly implied a lineage definition. Example, slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, civil rights struggle, a people forged in America, African heritage and American nationality. That's almost identical to what FBA or ADOS now describe as freedman lineage. So his concept was ethno-national, not pan-racial. Number 4, who did the technical category work? The groups that actually touched OMB or census structures were the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, parts of the Urban League, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, Black academics in sociology and anthropology, demographers at the Census Bureau. But they also didn't propose subcategories. Instead, they focused on replacing Negro and standardizing Black or African American. 5. A missed fork in the road. In 1997, OMB Directive 15 created Black as a race, no ethnic or lineage subdivisions. In 1988 and 89, Jackson rebrands identity, but doesn't challenge Directive 15's structure. If Jackson had proposed a category like African American U.S. slavery descent, the entire 1990s immigration, DEI, reparations, diaspora politics landscape would look different today. Why Jackson didn't push the bureaucratic angle? 3 strategic reasons. A, coalition politics. He still needed Caribbean and immigrant Black support in New York City, DC, Chicago, and Miami. He wasn't trying to provoke diaspora fragmentation. B, reparations wasn't mainstream yet. A lineage definition only becomes explosive once reparations enters mainstream policy space, which didn't happen until the 2010s and 2020s. C, no anticipation of immigration effects. Nobody foresaw that Nigerian, Ghanaian, Ethiopian, Somali, Haitian, Jamaican immigration would reshape Black elite representation in universities, media, tech, and politics. 7. Later reflections. In the 2000s and 2010s, Jackson acknowledged that African American was meant as a peoplehood term, not a race umbrella, but by then the category had already drifted. So final answer, direct to your question, did Jesse Jackson ever present how he thought OMB should set up categories? No, not in the bureaucratic or technical sense. He created a normative identity label, not a statistical lineage category. The structure FBA is now proposing, freedmen versus Caribbean versus African immigrant, is the logical policy extension of the identity Jackson helped popularize, but Jackson himself never operationalized it. So there are so many questions that this reading has, brought up for me. And questions that, again, I plan on addressing in future videos. But what's clear to me at this point is that OMB is really adamant about not using the FBA preferred structure. And there are really important political and legal reasons why they object. And I believe that for FBA delineation to be meaningful, it has to be adopted through the OMB and the Census Bureau and other government agencies. And those government agencies are not ready to make those changes, for very important reasons again. And so, with Jesse Jackson, he did not really push for those subdivisions the way FBA are pushing for it. And the reason he did not push for it is for political reasons, because he didn't want to break up the Democratic base of Black voters, for relations with Africa, for those reasons, for relations with Africa and other Caribbean countries, and maintaining a good relationship even within the American Black populations. So there are important reasons why he chose not to create those subdivisions. And I think today FBA has totally different reasons for why it wants to create those subdivisions. But again, I don't know if the OMB is going to agree to it. OMB is going to continue to fight against it for all of those reasons that we mentioned. And so are politicians like Jesse Jackson. Those political reasons still exist today. Creating that Democratic constituency, that's still an important reason for Black Americans, people that fall under the FBA category, are going to still fight against or still fight for. They're going to still want to have that strong constituency. So FBA has a fight on its hands, not just with the OMB. They have to contend with the legal concerns that the OMB and the government has with subdivision. But they're also going to have to contend with, the objections that their own people have with delineation and creating these new divisions. People like the Black Church and civil rights groups. It's not just the Democratic Party, but the Black Church, civil rights groups, and that's a large portion of the Black population. And these guys have a vested interest in maintaining that broad pan-racial view of African American. That pan-racial view also helps them to survive. And anything less to them can mean their destruction. So they're going to be fighting hard to maintain it the way it is. So FBA, doesn't have a fight with tethers. Your fight is not with tethers. It's not tethers that made that made it this way. It is absolutely the OMB and those black Democrat politicians and the black people who believe in this umbrella, those Pan-Africanists. Those are the people that you have to fight against, and that's where your fight is. It's not with tethers, because immigrants are not the ones that created this problem. It's those people, and so that's where your fight is, and that's where you're gonna have to concentrate your fight. So all of this division with black immigrants is just possibly because you think you won't win those other fights. Maybe that's where that division and frustration on your part is coming from, and the name calling. Maybe it's just all out of your frustration that you realize the fights you need to win, you will not be able to win. So, for now, we're going to leave it here for now. I think we've covered enough for one video, and so we're going to call it a day. But rest assured, we're not done with this topic. There are just too many questions that's still burning for us to leave this. Once again, thank you for your time. Thanks for stopping in. Hope you liked the video. But even if you didn't like the video, remember to like the video and hit that subscription button and the notification bell. And yeah, you're done, Noah. We're gonna catch you on the next one. Peace.
I want you to listen very, very carefully.
Tell the youth them to be strong. You can't tell the youth them to preach wrongs. While you trod it on these lands, just remember every man is equal. Yeah. Each one teach one, and a Father God, him a the only done. So make we reason, smoke trees, span the ends, all the deep meds. Take a look at life, and don't close your eyes. Sometimes things happen, and it's no surprise. And I just, so it go, so it go, so it go, so it go. It's the government, no have no heart, them no care about poor people. Yeah, bigger heads no love people again. Them more than little of them. Me see friends now reason again. Vex through whistle a blame. More time it hurt me if you see how the face. Deal with the eagle of them. Regular me see it a pain. Regular me see it a pain. Take a look at life and don't close your eyes. Sometimes things happen and it's no surprise. And I just, so it go, so it go, so it go, so it go. It's the government, no have no heart, them no care about poor people. Social commentary. Drop the one, your principle, you don't know. The global will come and do it. Some people life every day, it's stress. The high price from JPS, that topic is currently. Jah alone, him a go help you. We need food, cause we no healthy. We are feel the pain, beg you protect we. In our life, we have no fenve. Take a look at life, and don't close your eyes. Sometimes things happen, and it's no surprise. And I just, so it go, so it go, so it go, so it go. It's the government, no have no heart, them no care about poor people.